So what we need to do is to be smart and to start looking, get our heads out of the sand and start looking at what's the long-term need. What is it we need for 10 years? What is it we need for 20 years? Let's not have tax rates go up and down when we need to fix a bridge or we need to replace a couple trucks in a row. Let's look at a steady climb where we can look at that long-term plan and put the money into the reserves that's going to fund those projects or those, you know, out of sight or things that you hadn't planned on as far as bad winter conditions. Let's make sure we fund those reserves so that at the end of that 10 years and the end of that 20 years, we still have a reserve balance. So we can still continue on for the next 10 or 20 years. And when you look at that in a long-term plan, instead of having these huge spikes like there are in other municipalities very close to us who have had huge tax increases because they haven't put away or they haven't put away for their funds, we look at small steady increases. And a lot of municipalities are now saying, okay, let's put aside 0.5%, let's put aside 0.75% or 1% of a tax increase year after year that's dedicated to go to reserves so that we can fund all those capital needs and all those extraordinary events over the next 10 and 20 years.
So Paul, leading up to that, Infrastructure Ontario had, I don't know if they still do, but they had money at 2% for 30 years. And that's what I ran my election campaign on, that we should be planning the roads, going out and borrowing some of that money. I went to some municipal conferences where they said this is a smart way to do it. You won't get your roads any cheaper in the next 10 years or 20 years. Borrow the money, get some of the roads done now at a 2% interest, and the taxpayers will save money in the long run. And you'll get some of these roads done right now. Have you guys looked into that at all?
So I'm just going to write that down now. So you're saying borrow money and have a large capital.
At a 2% interest rate for 30 years.
Yes, I am
Fixed
aware of
2%.
that. I think it's gone up since then.
Probably has. Yeah.
Well, I know it has.
Yeah. What's it up to, Paul? 3%?
I don't think it's quite 3.
2.9 is probably work there.
And that's certainly a consideration, and that's a consideration a lot of
I
municipalities.
mean, we're all saying we're in trouble,
Yeah.
but you're not doing anything about it. You're just saying we're in trouble. We got to keep putting more in reserves because we're getting in trouble. Go do some of these roads at 3% interest and get out of trouble.
So I'm going to put down as a suggestion a large, more aggressive capital plan for roads and bridges, or just roads?
For whatever you need, if you can get the money at 3%.
Okay, aggressive.
Doesn't this take us right back to Faye's point at the beginning, as if we had a plan, we'd know the state things we're in and we'd know what we might need in the next 5 to 10 years?
Are we getting 2% interest on a 6 point?
My second question and final one. In 2013, the township spent a very large amount of money on a Parks and Recreation Facilities review by the Rethink Group, which this was brought to council in the late fall of 2013. In the last term of council, after 2013 review was brought forward, initiatives were completed from the document as follows: conversion of Sabic Arena to a turf facility, Beauty Waterfront Park, Bain Subdivision Playground. And it was understood that once the 2014 election was complete, the Parks and Recreation Committee would continue with proportional representation from throughout the township. Why has this not been established and built into the budgets? It's now 2017 and we're planning for, and a full 3 years has gone by since the adoption of this report. Why does Mayor Lovshin, Deputy Mayor Woods, and Council choose to ignore the majority of this report after much time and money was spent by our ratepayers in Hamilton Township to develop it? And at that point, our council was Mayor Lovshin, Councillor Woods, Deputy Mayor High, myself, and Councillor Davison. There's many suggestions for other communities that have been ignored, for Harwood, Gore's Landing, etc. And I think there are people here tonight that want to address that as well.
I'm sorry, I just write this down, and then I'm one of those guys that can only do one thing at a time. Okay, so I put down that council should spend more time on the reference back to the master plan in order to budget and show where it's implemented within the budget.
Yes.
Does that sound fair?
And there was to be a recreation committee, not just having council determine what happens throughout the township. There was supposed to be proportionally representative recreation committee continuing on, Parks and Rec Committee, which would have members from Bewdley, Harwood, Gores Landing, Cold Springs, Baltimore, everywhere, and they would review the needs of the township. Not just your recreation director, it would be them as well. So they had some input to council on behalf of all the ratepayers for what their needs were in those villages.
So public representation.
Mm-hmm. It was supposed to be reestablished after the election, and I've never heard a thing on it.
So we have gone ahead with the many of the recommendations, using that as helpful information to help us guide us in investments in the community. An example was some of the ones you mentioned, Savick, for example.
That was before we left, yeah.
That started, but from that plan, and then other pieces have occurred as well, like the investment in Buttersfield Park. The application, the information from the report was used for the funding application. We were successful in getting half funding for that. We also used it in the funding application for Baltimore Park. And we've also used it to submit applications for improvements in Gores Landing as well, as far as
Park?
no, the wharf improvements and improvements in that area as far as justification and rationale. So there's been a number of uses of that material built into our plans, and also as part of that, working with people on other proposals as they come forward, or other ideas that come forward, whether that's in Harwood or Gores Landing subsequently. And our new manager of Parks and Recreation, he's been out very active, meeting with people in the community directly and getting information and feedback directly from the community as we continue to make improvements in that whole area.
And have we budgeted for a recreation committee?
We haven't done that specifically, no.
What's the report say about the Harwood Park and the spare parks in the township?
Well, we were using those as far as if there was play equipment. For example, I think the one on, can you correct me, Trevor, the park that had all its equipment removed and is now being replaced?
For this year?
Yeah,
So the Castle Hill Park?
Castle Hill.
That's down the south end. Yeah.
We're talking about the Harwood Park.
But that was one as an example. But in Harwood Park, no, I don't have anything specific out of it. I'd have to look at it, so I don't want to say something incorrect. But in the Harwood one, we've been working with requests of the Friends of Harwood and the residents as far as changes, the allocation that council made a decision last year on the amount of money to allocate, and we proceeded to try and deal with the results of that and getting it right as far as implementing that.
I think the report says there's money should be set aside by the council to buy playground equipment for a private entity, which is Harwood Park. And I also asked the other question about the other parks that aren't being utilized. What's the township going to do? We have many parks here that aren't being utilized. Should either be turned back to the people that own them, who donated them, or sell them off and do something else with them because they're not being utilized.
I think Trevor was trying to.
Just on the Harvard Park, it is in the study that it mentions that the township should go into partnership with the Harvard Hall Committee in pursuing new playground equipment there. And that hasn't been done to date, to my knowledge, but
I understand. I'm just asking if we've done that. So.
Yeah, yeah, that is in the study.
John.
Just a bit of an add-on to what Pauline's saying. The other day I was sitting in council and they passed the minutes from the Cold Springs Hall. And the mayor came out and probably said, well, what about their request for $10,000 from the budget? They sat there and had a few words of what they're going to spend it on and passed it right there. Outside the budgetary items, they just passed $10,000. Now I congratulate council for that. Because now, in all fairness, let's treat every other building and every other facility in the township and give them $10,000. And let's give Pauline's group $10,000 for that waterfront group to be approved, Gores Landing, the old schoolhouse, et cetera, et cetera. And also, they're going to put $3,000 in reserves as well. So there's $13,000 going towards one building in the township. I think everybody should be treated equally.
Paul, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Farmers got hit big time this year with impact. In fact, land we just purchased a year and a half ago for $5,000 an acre, which was top dollar, is gonna assess for $10,000 an acre in 3 more years.
Yes.
So, and I said, you're nuts, it's not gonna be worth that. Are you going to change like, farms usually get a 25% rate in this municipality, and you have the right, my understanding is, to lower that 25% rate down, because MPAC has crazily speculated above our current values, as opposed to residences, they don't do that?
That would be a county-wide decision, because the whole county together must agree together. to
I
change
guess that's
those
a
rates.
question we should ask the county.
Because when there's an organization called Opta where you load all your tax rates up onto, and all of the lower tier municipalities, and what Don's talking about is the tax ratio. So you have your tax rate, and it's multiplied to a degree that's called a weighting factor. So residential is 1. So if the tax rate is 0.5%, on residential is 0.5%, on multi-residential it's higher than 1%, commercial and industrial, and then for farmland it's 0.25%. So whatever it is on residential for farmland would be 25% of that, and that's called weighting. So the answer is yeah, there is they have the ability to change it, but it has to be done with the whole county, all the lower tiers.
Has anybody even talked about even thinking about doing this?
Very few counties in all of Ontario have.
Okay. So I guess, how do we go about that? We just go to county and ask them to look at it?
Yes, you can, but keep in mind, with the tax levy requirement, I'll just refer back to 416 with that. That tax levy requirement of $7,405,000 would still be there if the farmland goes between 25%, then somebody else is going to pay for it. So it'll just get
But that
shifted.
somebody else was already paying for it, and now all of a sudden farmers have gotten it going way above the actual value, which is not what our residence is. Our residences are less than the actual value and working their way up to the actual value in 3 years.
Yeah.
So that's.
yeah,
that's
again-
what- but
again, that has
I
to
don't want
be-
to spend a lot of time on that, but now that I know that no one's done it, we'll take it from there.
Okay.
Thanks.
And you should also be.
Great. Any more ideas? John?
You got you went to your website there a few minutes ago. I've had more complaints from seniors, I guess I'm in a bad age bracket now, but people who have been higher in age than I am are very disorientated by the website.
Okay.
It has to be made more friendly user. In other words, you're gonna have to dismantle the whole website and rebuild it as it's supposed to be built to make it more practical for people to go into the site, have a sidebar that says expenditures for 2017, financials for 2017, road work needs to be done, whatever category's in there, whether it be the policy procedure manual or the council procedure policies, everything should be in there in chronological order. You can just punch in that little computer and it goes right straight to the site. This business of having to go in there and type in what you require, then you have to go into financials, then you have to go into this, go into that, it's too cumbersome, yeah,
Okay.
that's the word I'm looking for. It needs to be improved, and you've only got $7,500, I think it is, this year for website,
That's right.
and that's all it is, basically just an upkeep, correct? There's lots of money available in this budget
Mhm.
from reserves that you put aside from different organizations that I feel don't require the reserves, and you could use that money to put towards a better, improved website for everybody to use.
Okay.